It's a dead centre of the agenda.
Yes.
We've got 22 items. Carry on.
So this rather gripping paper, which has been extremely elegantly written, is about a review of our cemetery bylaw. We're doing this because the statute says we have to review it within 5 years of adopting a bylaw. And a council last did that in 2006, and so we're squeaking in before the end of the year with a review. There's some general discussion in there about the need for a bylaw, because the first thing you have to do is determine that you need a bylaw. There's no point having one if you don't need one. And we looked at the issues around running cemeteries and decided actually you do, because you do need actually only qualified and experienced people in charge of burials. And there's some health and safety things in relation to who's digging graves and what time of day they're digging them, and is there sufficient light for that. So there's some kind of reasons around why a bylaw's not a stupid idea. But in addition, council needs some rules around managing memorials. And then the paper goes on to just explain to you some issues in managing memorials. This is mostly for your information in relation to headstones, because there was a complaint to council a while back about a headstone which had an inscription on the back of it. And the people whose grave was not at the back of that one, they had a little plaque in the ground, and they felt that people looking for their family member wouldn't spot it because they'd be distracted by the text on this big headstone. Anyway, we got a legal opinion on that, and it would be a breach of the Bill of Rights to limit freedom of expression by not letting people write on the back of their headstones. So we talked to the family about it, and what they did was they moved their plaque across a bit so that problem's sort of resolved. But essentially it's an issue that if practice changes and people more commonly get their headstones inscribed on the front and the back, then everyone will just get used to the new process and the problem will go away. In terms of the actual bylaw, what I've given you from page 11/5 onwards is a somewhat revised bylaw. Well, the first thing we did was we squashed it down so it only took up, I think it's 4 or 5 pages instead of 11. But we've also tidied up some of the language and made some things more explicit. For example, the size of a headstone. It turns out you need a permit to put a headstone in a cemetery. Not everybody knows this, and quite a lot of people put their headstones up without coming into council to get a permit. It also turns out that the maximum size of your headstone is supposed to be written on the form when you come for your permit. If you don't know to get a permit, you'll never turn up for the form and you'll never find out how big your headstone should have been. So we've got a bit of muddle about how we just do this stuff. So we wanted to bring a bit more clarity into things. So we've clarified some of the rules in terms of headstones in the bylaw. And if you're particularly interested, then you might want to look at page 11/8, clauses 7.9, 7.10, 7.11, 7.12. Perhaps the one thing I might say is that we are one district. We did that as we were made one district with a bunch of local government reforms some decades ago. We created one rating area, one district. But in fact, our cemeteries serve quite distinct communities. And if you go around them, as I had actually a really nice afternoon doing, you realise that they do serve different communities. They have different characteristics. They reflect different histories and the different people that they're designed to serve. And so, in fact, we should have slightly different rules for each of our cemeteries to cater for the different communities. So, for example, the Taupo Lawn Cemetery is let's call it a very conventional lawn cemetery, which is perhaps in keeping with some of its citizens. The Turangi Cemetery reflects its history. It has an urupa, which is a Māori burial area. It has a special area for burying returned servicemen, or actually dead ones. It also has another general cemetery area, and there's some quite stunning, I would call them community expressions of remembering people who mattered to them. And those expressions and those memorials are they're more diverse than you might expect to find in a Taupo cemetery. And the same is true in Mangakino. So that's why we have some slightly different rules about how to operate the bylaw. It's to meet the needs of different communities. So that's my lecture for you on the cemetery bylaw review. Any questions?
Least we forget. Councillor Kepper.
Just to say that Turangi has been affected on a number of occasions by oversized headstones, which has been good in terms of them coming before the board, and I don't recall the board ever having turned down an application. But I'm rather intrigued on 11(2) about the provisions of the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act with the inscription on the back of the stones. Surely this is an imposition on the grave site adjacent to that headstone, directly behind that headstone, in terms of if the grave site behind that headstone decides to erect a headstone which will cover out the back inscription on the back of that the previous headstone, surely there would be a complaint from the other party, the party that's already had got the inscription on the back of the headstone. How do we intend to deal with that?
Okay, one of the things I've suggested in the resolution is that you adopt these proposed changes with effect from 1 March 2012, and that is so that we have time, once you've kind of basically said, yes, this is the bylaw we want, this is how we want to do things, so that we have time to amend a number of the documents that we use in relation to burials and headstones, so that we can also forward packages of information to funeral directors within the area. And some of that will address the Bill of Rights issue around freedom of expression and headstones. But to be honest, if it's your headstone, you can have written on it what you like, so long as it doesn't meet some very extreme standards of offensive. And if somebody else puts up a headstone that kind of blocks that, well, that was a risk you took.
Further on that, Your Worship, I agree, and I think that in the policy 7.12 covers it, does not extend into the space of another lot. So,
that's correct.
Councillor Johnson.
Do we have rules at the moment on the wreaths, memorabilia and flower receptacles? Is there? It's already in place, so we're not deviating too much from...
No, what I've suggested is that we've done some kind of tidying up and clarifying within this bylaw. So long as we don't change the status of any of the people who are affected by it or the rights of anybody, we can revise this bylaw without using a whole formal special consultative procedure. And in the interest of efficiency, I'd really like us to do that. Sometime over the next 18 months, my team will actually go through all the bylaws and work out how to tidy them all up into a really coherent package. We'll work closely with Tina's team on that. And so that we don't have to bring bylaws to you terribly often at all in future. We'll just kind of get one or two or three or whatever we need, but kind of get something reasonably coherent and sharp and focused. But in the meantime, we're left with this slightly hodgepodge mix of old language, but if we start changing it too much, we'll then have to use a special consultative procedure, which carries a whole bunch of other costs.
Okay, no further questions of that. Suggested resolution, please, mover. Councillor Williams, seconded. Councillor Kepper. All in favour? Aye. Thank you very much. Moving now to item